In the grand halls of Avalonia's royal palace, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on marble floors, a simple cup of tea would unravel a conspiracy that had been brewing for over 2 decades. Princess Alara Montclair, beloved by her people and admired worldwide for her charitable work, had no idea that her daily afternoon ritual was slowly killing her. The delicate porcelain teacup, passed down through generations of royal women, held more than Earl Grey and honey. It contained a secret so devastating that powerful people had murdered to protect it, and would kill again to keep it buried forever. What started as a routine investigation into the princess's mysterious fainting spells would expose a web of betrayal reaching into the highest echelons of government, revealing that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those who smile while serving you tea. The truth hidden in those fragrant leaves would not only threaten Alara's life, but shake the very foundations of the monarchy itself. The autumn rain drummed against the towering windows of Rosewood Palace as Princess Alara Montclair settled into her favorite armchair in the blue drawing room. At 28, she possessed the kind of natural elegance that made photographers scramble for the perfect shot, though today she felt anything but photogenic. A persistent headache had been plaguing her for weeks, accompanied by dizzy spells that left her gripping furniture for support. "Your Royal Highness, your afternoon tea," announced Margaret Whitmore, the head housekeeper who had served the royal family for 37 years. The silver-haired woman moved with practiced grace, setting the ornate tea service on the mahogany side table with ceremonial precision. Alara smiled warmly at the woman who had been like a second mother to her since childhood. "Thank you, Margaret. You know exactly how I like it." The ritual was always the same. The delicate Sèvres porcelain teacup, painted with tiny forget-me-nots, had belonged to Alara's grandmother, Queen Victoria Montclair. The Earl Grey tea was steeped for precisely 4 minutes, served with a single cube of raw sugar and a splash of cream. Margaret prepared it personally every day at exactly 3 o'clock, a tradition that had begun when Alara was 7 years old and homesick during her first week at boarding school. As Alara lifted the cup to her lips, she noticed Margaret lingering by the window, her weathered hands clasped tightly behind her back. This was unusual. Margaret typically excused herself immediately after serving tea, bustling off to manage the endless demands of palace life. "Is everything all right, Margaret?" Alara asked, pausing with the cup halfway to her mouth. Margaret turned, and, for a fleeting moment, Alara caught something strange in the older woman's expression. Fear? Guilt? It vanished so quickly that Alara wondered if she had imagined it. "Of course, Your Highness. I was simply admiring the garden. The groundskeepers have done magnificent work with the rose beds this season." Alara followed Margaret's gaze to the manicured gardens below, where late-blooming roses created splashes of crimson against the gray October sky. She took a sip of her tea, savoring the familiar bergamot flavor, unaware that Margaret was watching her with the intensity of a hawk observing its prey. 20 minutes later, as Margaret collected the empty teacup, Alara felt the familiar wave of dizziness wash over her. She gripped the arms of her chair, willing the sensation to pass. These episodes had become increasingly frequent over the past month, always occurring shortly after her afternoon tea. "Your Highness." Margaret's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Shall I call Dr. Harrison?" No, Alara managed, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just tired. I think I'll rest before tonight's charity gala." Margaret nodded and quickly cleared the tea service, her movements more hurried than usual. As she headed toward the door, the teacup rattled against the saucer in her trembling hands. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the palace's sprawling basement, Dr. James Harrison was conducting his own investigation. As the royal family's personal physician for 15 years, he had grown increasingly concerned about Princess Alara's deteriorating health. Her blood tests showed no obvious abnormalities, but her symptoms suggested something more sinister than simple exhaustion. Dr. Harrison had served in military medicine before joining the royal household, and he recognized the signs of chronic poisoning when he saw them. The gradual onset, the neurological symptoms, the way Alara's condition worsened and then seemed to improve in cycles. Someone was slowly, methodically, killing the princess. The question was who and why? That evening, as Alara prepared for the children's hospital charity gala, She stood before her bedroom mirror adjusting a sapphire necklace that had belonged to her late mother. The reflection staring back at her showed subtle changes that makeup could no longer completely hide. Her skin had lost some of its natural glow, and there were faint shadows beneath her green eyes that spoke of restless nights and unexplained fatigue. Lady Catherine Worthington, her lady-in-waiting and closest friend since university, appeared in the mirror behind her. "You look beautiful, as always," Catherine said, though concern flickered across her features. "Are you certain you're well enough for tonight's event? You've seemed so tired lately." "I'm fine," Alara replied automatically, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "This fundraiser is too important. The Children's Wing desperately needs that new equipment." Catherine had known Alara long enough to recognize when her friend was pushing herself beyond her limits. Over the past weeks, she had watched Alara grow increasingly pale and fragile, despite maintaining her busy schedule of royal engagements and charitable work. "Perhaps you should see a specialist," Catherine suggested gently. "Dr. Harrison is wonderful, but maybe a fresh perspective would help." Alara turned from the mirror, her expression suddenly sharp. "Has Dr. Harrison spoken to you about my health?" "No, of course not. But I have eyes, Alara. You're not well, and it's getting worse." The gala proceeded as planned, held in the palace's magnificent ballroom where 500 guests had gathered to support the Children's Hospital expansion project. Alara moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her genuine warmth and interest in each person she met making the evening a tremendous success. By the time the last guest departed at midnight, the charity had raised nearly £2 million. But those closest to Alara noticed the subtle signs of her struggle. The way she discreetly gripped table edges for support. The slightly longer pauses between sentences as waves of dizziness passed. The careful way she positioned herself near chairs and walls, always within reach of something solid. Dr. Harrison observed from the edges of the ballroom, his trained eye cataloging each symptom. When Alara briefly swayed during her speech, caught by Catherine's quick reflexes, he made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, while Alara slept late after the exhausting gala, Dr. Harrison made his way to the blue drawing room. He had requested permission to examine the space where Alara spent most of her private time, ostensibly to check for environmental factors that might be affecting her health. Margaret Whitmore intercepted him at the door, her usual pleasant demeanor replaced by barely concealed anxiety. "Dr. Harrison, I wasn't expecting you this morning. Her Highness is still resting." "I'm not here to see the princess," he replied calmly. "I'd like to examine this room for possible allergens or irritants that might be contributing to her symptoms." Margaret's face went pale. "I assure you, Doctor, this room is cleaned thoroughly every day. We use only the finest products, nothing that could harm Her Highness." Dr. Harrison studied the housekeeper's face carefully. In his experience, innocent people didn't react with such obvious distress to routine medical inquiries. "I'm sure you're very thorough, Mrs. Whitmore. I'd still like to take a look around, if you don't mind." Margaret had little choice but to step aside, though she remained in the room, watching his every move with the intensity of a guard dog protecting its territory. Dr. Harrison examined the furniture, tested the air quality, and carefully inspected the afternoon tea setup that remained on the side table from the previous day. The porcelain teacup sat innocently in its saucer, a small amount of tea residue dried in the bottom. Dr. Harrison lifted it carefully, noting Margaret's sharp intake of breath. "This cup," he said conversationally, "it's quite beautiful. Family heirloom." "Yes," Margaret replied tersely. "It belonged to Queen Victoria. Princess Alara is very attached to it. I can see why. The craftsmanship is exquisite." Dr. Harrison turned the cup slowly in his hands, examining every inch of the delicate porcelain. "Tell me, Mrs. Whitmore, who else has access to Princess Alara's tea service?" Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "I don't understand what you're suggesting, Doctor." "I'm not suggesting anything," Dr. Harrison replied mildly. "I'm simply trying to understand the princess's daily routine, to identify anything that might be affecting her health." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Edmund Blackwood, the king's private secretary and one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. At 62, Blackwood possessed the kind of understated authority that came from decades of proximity to power. His steel-gray hair was impeccably styled, and his dark suit was tailored to perfection, but it was his eyes that commanded attention. They were the color of winter ice, calculating and utterly without warmth. "Dr. Harrison," Blackwood said, his cultured voice carrying just a hint of displeasure. "Mrs. Whitmore mentioned you were conducting some sort of investigation." "Hardly an investigation, Lord Blackwood. I'm simply trying to help Princess Alara feel better. She's been experiencing some troubling symptoms lately." "Yes, I understand she's been working too hard. The pressures of royal life can be overwhelming for someone so young." Blackwood's tone suggested that the conversation was over, but Dr. Harrison wasn't easily intimidated. "Actually, her symptoms suggest something more serious than simple overwork. I'd like to run some additional tests." Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something cold and dangerous flickered in those pale eyes. "I trust you'll be discreet, Doctor. We wouldn't want to alarm the public unnecessarily." The warning was clear, though couched in polite language. Dr. Harrison nodded slowly, understanding that he was walking into dangerous territory. "Of course, Lord Blackwood. Patient confidentiality is paramount." After Blackwood and Margaret left the room, Dr. Harrison remained alone with his thoughts and growing suspicions. He carefully wrapped the teacup in his handkerchief and slipped it into his medical bag. If his suspicions were correct, the innocuous-looking porcelain held the key to understanding what was happening to Princess Alara. That afternoon, Dr. Harrison drove to his private laboratory in London, a facility he had maintained since his days in military research. The lab was small but equipped with sophisticated testing equipment that would allow him to analyze the tea residue without involving the palace's official channels. As he prepared the samples for testing, Dr. Harrison's mind raced through the possibilities. Chronic poisoning was notoriously difficult to detect, especially when administered in small doses over extended periods. The symptoms matched several toxic substances, but the method of delivery suggested someone with intimate access to the princess's daily routine. Margaret Whitmore had served the royal family faithfully for nearly 4 decades. The idea that she might be involved seemed impossible, yet her behavior that morning had been far from normal. And Lord Blackwood's sudden appearance and thinly veiled threats suggested that powerful people were very interested in keeping certain secrets buried. While Dr. Harrison worked in his laboratory, Princess Alara was having her own moment of clarity. The morning's rest had helped clear her head, and she found herself thinking about the pattern of her symptoms. The dizzy spells, the headaches, the inexplicable fatigue, they all seemed to follow a predictable schedule, occurring most severely in the late afternoon and evening. Standing in her private sitting room, Alara's gaze fell on the beautiful porcelain teacup that Margaret had just finished cleaning. It sat innocently on the silver tray, waiting for the next afternoon's ritual. For the first time, Alara wondered if her beloved afternoon tea might somehow be connected to her mysterious illness. The thought seemed absurd. Margaret had been preparing her tea for over 20 years. The woman had watched Alara grow up, had comforted her through childhood nightmares and adolescent heartbreaks. The idea that Margaret might wish her harm was unthinkable. Yet as Alara stood there, staring at the delicate cup painted with forget-me-nots, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows seemed to illuminate the porcelain with an almost sinister glow, and, for the first time in her life, Princess Alara felt truly afraid in her own home. Unknown to both Dr. Harrison and Princess Alara, their separate investigations had already set dangerous wheels in motion. In the shadows of Rosewood Palace, people who had successfully hidden their secrets for over 2 decades were preparing to do whatever it took to keep those secrets buried. The princess's growing awareness and the doctor's medical expertise posed a threat that could no longer be ignored. As evening fell over the palace grounds, Margaret Whitmore stood in her small apartment in the servants' quarters, staring at a photograph that she kept hidden in her jewelry box. The picture showed a young woman with Alara's green eyes and gentle smile, a woman who had died under mysterious circumstances 25 years ago. Margaret's hands trembled as she touched the faded image, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The time for secrets was running out, and Margaret knew that soon she would have to make the most difficult choice of her life. Continue the deception that had consumed her soul for decades, or finally, tell the truth that would destroy everything she had worked to protect? In her laboratory, Dr. Harrison's preliminary tests were yielding disturbing results. The tea residue contained traces of a sophisticated toxin, something that would be virtually undetectable in routine medical examinations. This wasn't the work of an amateur. Someone with extensive knowledge of chemistry and access to rare compounds was systematically poisoning Princess Alara. As he prepared more detailed analysis, Dr. Harrison made a decision that would put his own life at risk. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in over a decade, a contact from his military intelligence days who specialized in investigating threats against high-profile targets. "Thomas, it's James Harrison. I need your help with something extremely sensitive." The voice on the other end was cautious, but interested. "How sensitive are we talking about, James?" "The kind that could bring down governments," Dr. Harrison replied quietly. "I think someone is trying to murder Princess Alara." Part 2. The secure meeting took place at midnight in a 24-hour cafe in an unremarkable section of London, far from the glittering world of palaces and protocol. Thomas Startling looked every inch the former intelligence operative, his sharp eyes constantly scanning the nearly empty establishment for potential threats. At 55, he had spent 30 years in the shadows, protecting British interests in ways that would never make the evening news. Dr. Harrison slid the laboratory results across the small table, his voice barely above a whisper. Thallium sulfate, administered in microscopic doses over an extended period. It's virtually undetectable unless you know exactly what to look for. Thomas studied the chemical analysis, his expression growing grimmer with each line. "This is sophisticated work, James. Whoever is doing this has access to restricted compounds and extensive knowledge of toxicology. This isn't some disgruntled palace employee acting on impulse." "That's what terrifies me," Dr. Harrison admitted. "Princess Alara trusts everyone around her completely. She has no idea that someone in her inner circle is slowly killing her." Thomas leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. Thallium was a favorite of Cold War assassins. It's called the poisoner's poison because it mimics so many other conditions. The victim appears to be dying of natural causes, usually attributed to stress or an undiagnosed medical condition. "How long does she have?" Dr. Harrison asked, though he dreaded the answer. "If the poisoning continues at this rate, perhaps 6 months before permanent neurological damage sets in. A year before." Thomas didn't need to finish the sentence. Dr. Harrison felt a chill run down his spine. "We have to warn her." "Absolutely not," Thomas said sharply. "If we tip our hand now, whoever is behind this will either accelerate their timeline or find another method. We need to identify the perpetrator first. So we just let her continue being poisoned? We need evidence that will hold up in court and expose the entire conspiracy. This goes deeper than one person slipping poison into tea. Someone with serious resources and government connections is orchestrating this." Thomas pulled out a small digital device and slid it across the table. "This is a spectrum analyzer, military grade. It can detect trace amounts of various toxins in real time. You need to test everything Princess Alara consumes, everything she touches. But be extremely careful. If the wrong people realize we're onto them." The next morning, Princess Alara woke feeling slightly better than she had in weeks. The previous evening's early bedtime had helped, and she was determined to maintain a full schedule despite her ongoing health concerns. Her first engagement was a visit to St. Mary's Children's Hospital, followed by the opening of a new community center in East London. Lady Catherine noticed the improvement in Alara's condition as they prepared for the day's activities. "You seem more energetic this morning," she observed while helping Alara select an appropriate outfit for the hospital visit. "I feel a bit better," Alara agreed, though she couldn't shake the persistent unease that had been growing stronger each day. "Catherine, have you noticed anything strange about the palace staff lately? Anyone behaving oddly?" Catherine paused in her examination of Alara's jewelry options. "What do you mean?" "Margaret seemed nervous yesterday, almost frightened. And Lord Blackwood has been appearing more frequently in my private quarters. It feels like I'm being watched." "The security review is ongoing," Catherine reminded her. "Perhaps that's why everyone seems a bit on edge." But Catherine's answer felt inadequate, even to her own ears. She had indeed noticed subtle changes in the palace atmosphere over the past few weeks. whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, staff members who avoided eye contact, an almost palpable tension that seemed to permeate the elegant halls and chambers. At St. Mary's Hospital, Princess Alara threw herself into her work with characteristic dedication. She spent over an hour in the pediatric ward, reading stories to young patients and bringing smiles to faces that had seen too much suffering for their tender years. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the hospital's chief pediatrician, was struck by the princess's genuine compassion and her ability to connect with each child on their level. "Your Highness," Dr. Morrison said as they walked through the hospital corridors, "the children absolutely adore you. You have such a natural gift with them." Alara smiled, momentarily forgetting her own troubles. "They're so brave. These children face challenges that would break most adults, yet they laugh and play and dream of the future. They inspire me far more than I could ever inspire them." As they continued the tour, Alara began to feel the familiar dizziness returning. She gripped Dr. Morrison's arm slightly, trying to steady herself without drawing attention to her discomfort. "Are you all right, Your Highness?" Dr. Morrison asked quietly, her medical training immediately detecting signs of distress. "Just a bit tired," Alara replied, though the concerned expression on the doctor's face suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Meanwhile, Dr. Harrison was conducting his own covert investigation within the palace walls. Using Thomas's spectrum analyzer, he had been systematically testing various items in Princess Alara's private quarters. The results were disturbing. The thallium contamination wasn't limited to the teacup. Traces of the poison were found on Alara's hairbrush, her favorite pen, even her reading glasses. Someone had been very thorough in their poisoning campaign, ensuring that Alara would be exposed to the toxin through multiple contact points throughout her daily routine. This level of systematic contamination required extensive access to her personal belongings and intimate knowledge of her habits. Dr. Harrison's investigation was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Margaret Whitmore. The head housekeeper stood in the doorway of Alara's sitting room, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. "Dr. Harrison, what are you doing here?" "Princess Alara is at her hospital engagement. Routine environmental health assessment," Dr. Harrison replied calmly, though he quickly pocketed the spectrum analyzer. "I'm concerned about potential allergens that might be affecting her recovery." Margaret's eyes darted around the room, taking note of the various items Dr. Harrison had been examining. "I assure you, Doctor, everything is cleaned according to the strictest protocols. We use only the finest products." "I'm sure you do, Mrs. Whitmore. Tell me, who has access to Princess Alara's private quarters?" The question seemed to strike Margaret like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, gripping the doorframe for support. The usual staff, of course. Myself, the daily cleaning team, Lady Catherine, Lord Blackwood when necessary. And the princess's personal items? Who handles those?" Margaret's composure finally cracked. Tears began streaming down her weathered cheeks, and her voice became a barely audible whisper. "Doctor, there are things I can't tell you. Things that would destroy innocent people." Dr. Harrison moved closer, his voice gentle but urgent. "Mrs. Whitmore, Princess Alara is very ill. If you know something that could help her, you must tell me." Margaret looked around frantically, as if expecting to see hidden listeners in every shadow. "Not here," she whispered. "Meet me tonight in the Rose Garden, by the old sundial. Midnight. And, Doctor, trust no one else." No one. That evening, as Princess Alara returned from her community center opening, she felt the familiar wave of exhaustion and dizziness settling over her like a heavy blanket. The afternoon's activities had been successful, but the effort required to maintain her public composure was becoming increasingly difficult. Lady Catherine helped her prepare for bed, noting with concern how pale and fragile Alara had become. "Perhaps we should cancel tomorrow's engagements," Catherine suggested. "You need rest." "I can't keep canceling," Alara replied weakly. "People are depending on these events. The charities need the attention and funding." "The charities won't benefit if you collapse during an engagement," Catherine pointed out gently. "Your health has to come first." As Catherine helped Alara into her nightgown, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There were small, dark spots on Alara's arms and shoulders, barely visible, but unmistakably present. Catherine had seen similar markings once before, during her medical training, on a patient who had been suffering from heavy metal poisoning. "Alara," Catherine said carefully, "these marks on your skin, how long have you had them?" Alara looked down at her arms, seeing the spots as if for the first time. "I'm not sure. A few weeks, perhaps. I thought they were just age spots or stress-related." Catherine's mind raced. The combination of neurological symptoms, fatigue, and now these dermatological changes painted a terrifying picture. Someone was systematically poisoning her dearest friend, and Catherine realized with crystal clarity that Princess Alara was in immediate mortal danger. At midnight, Dr. Harrison made his way through the moonlit palace gardens to the designated meeting spot. The rose garden was particularly beautiful in autumn, with late-blooming varieties creating splashes of color against the silvery landscape. The ancient sundial stood in the center of a small clearing, its bronze face catching glints of moonlight. Margaret Whitmore emerged from the shadows like a ghost, her usual composed demeanor replaced by obvious terror. She looked around continuously, as if expecting assassins to materialize from behind every bush. "Thank you for coming, Doctor," she whispered. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about this family." Dr. Harrison waited patiently as Margaret struggled to find the courage to speak. When she finally began, her story was so shocking that he wondered if he was listening to the ravings of a disturbed mind. 25 years ago, Princess Alara's mother, Princess Isabella, discovered something terrible about her husband's government connections. Documents that proved the royal family was involved in illegal arms sales to hostile nations. Isabella threatened to expose everything. Margaret's voice broke as she continued. "Lord Blackwood came to me with an ultimatum. Either I help eliminate Isabella quietly, or they would frame her for treason and execute her publicly, destroying the monarchy forever." Dr. Harrison felt his blood turn to ice. "You poisoned Princess Isabella?" "With the same method being used on Alara now," Margaret sobbed. "Slow, gradual, designed to look like natural illness. I told myself I was protecting the crown, protecting the stability of the nation. But I've lived with the guilt every single day since." "Why is this happening to Alara? She's not involved in government affairs." Margaret's eyes were wild with fear and desperation. "She's been asking questions about her mother's death, requesting access to old medical records, wanting to know about hereditary conditions. Lord Blackwood is terrified that she'll uncover the truth about Isabella's murder. So he's decided to eliminate her as well," Dr. Harrison concluded grimly. "It's not just Blackwood," Margaret whispered, glancing around the garden nervously. "There's a group of them, powerful men who have been protecting this secret for decades. Government ministers, military officials, even members of the royal household. They call themselves the Crown Guardians, and they'll kill anyone who threatens their version of stability." Dr. Harrison realized they were dealing with something far more dangerous than a simple poisoning. This was a conspiracy involving the highest levels of government, people with unlimited resources, and the willingness to commit murder to protect their secrets. "We have to get Princess Alara to safety," he said urgently. "Tonight." Margaret shook her head sadly. "They're watching everything, Doctor. Every phone call, every movement, every person who enters or leaves the palace. If we try to warn her or move her suddenly, they'll accelerate their timeline. Then, what do you suggest?" "There's only one way to stop this," Margaret said, her voice gaining strength as she made a decision that had been tormenting her for years. "I have to confess everything publicly, expose the entire conspiracy before they can silence me. But I'll need proof, evidence that will be impossible to deny or cover up." Dr. Harrison thought quickly. "I have the laboratory results proving the thallium poisoning, and I can get more evidence if we work together." "There's something else," Margaret continued. "Hidden in my quarters, I've kept documents from Isabella's murder. Medical records that were falsified, correspondence between Blackwood and his conspirators. I was supposed to destroy everything, but I couldn't bring myself to do it." "Where are these documents now?" "In a safe deposit box at Barclays Bank in London. I've been saving them as insurance, in case the Crown Guardians ever decided I knew too much." Dr. Harrison made a quick decision. "We need those documents tonight. And we need to get word to Princess Alara without alerting the conspiracy." "There is someone who can help," Margaret said thoughtfully. Lady Catherine. She's not part of the household staff, and she loves Alara like a sister. If anyone can be trusted to protect the princess, it's her. As they made plans to retrieve the evidence and warn Lady Catherine, neither Dr. Harrison nor Margaret noticed the figure watching them from the shadows of a nearby oak tree. Lord Edmund Blackwood lowered his night vision binoculars and smiled coldly. The old housekeeper had finally outlived her usefulness, and the inconvenient doctor was about to learn that some secrets were worth killing for. Blackwood activated a small communication device and spoke quietly into it. The doctor and the housekeeper are compromised. Initiate Protocol 7 immediately. Within minutes, armed figures began moving through the palace grounds, their mission clear and their methods proven effective over decades of protecting the Crown Guardian's interests. The endgame was beginning, and Princess Alara's time was running out faster than anyone realized. Back in the Rose Garden, Dr. Harrison and Margaret continued planning their desperate gambit to save the princess and expose the truth, unaware that their conversation had just signed their death warrants. The conspiracy that had successfully murdered Princess Isabella 25 years ago was preparing to claim new victims, and this time they would leave no witnesses alive to tell the tale. The ancient sundial stood silent witness to their urgent whispers, its bronze face reflecting moonlight like a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. But time was running out, and dawn would bring consequences that would change the course of history forever. Part 3. Lady Catherine Worthington couldn't sleep. Something was desperately wrong at Rosewood Palace, and her instincts screamed danger with every breath she took. After discovering the mysterious spots on Princess Alara's skin, Catherine had spent hours researching medical conditions online, and every search led to the same terrifying conclusion: heavy metal poisoning. At 2 in the morning, she made a decision that would either save her best friend's life or get them both killed. Catherine dressed quickly in dark clothes and made her way through the palace's labyrinthine corridors toward Alara's private quarters, moving as silently as possible through shadows that seemed to hold hidden threats. The palace at night was a different world from its daytime splendor. Without the bustling activity of staff and visitors, every creak of ancient floorboards sounded like thunder, every whisper of wind through tall windows like ominous warnings. Catherine had walked these halls thousands of times over the years, but tonight they felt alien and threatening. She found Princess Alara's door slightly ajar, which was unusual. Alara always slept with her door locked, a habit formed during her teenage years when unwanted media attention had made privacy a precious commodity. Catherine pushed the door open carefully and stepped inside. The sitting room was empty, moonlight streaming through the tall windows to illuminate furniture draped in protective shadows. Catherine moved toward the bedroom, her heart pounding with each step. What she found there made her blood freeze in her veins. Princess Alara lay motionless in her bed, her breathing shallow and labored. Even in the dim light, Catherine could see that her friend's condition had deteriorated dramatically since they had said goodnight just 4 hours earlier. Alara's skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her lips showed the faint blue tinge that Catherine recognized as a sign of oxygen deprivation. "Alara," Catherine whispered, gently shaking her friend's shoulder. "Alara, wake up." The princess stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering open with obvious difficulty. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible, each word requiring tremendous effort. "Catherine, what's wrong? I need to get you out of here," Catherine said urgently. "Right now? Don't ask questions, just trust me." But, as Catherine helped Alara sit up, she heard the soft sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Multiple sets of feet, moving with the deliberate precision of people who didn't want to be detected. Catherine's blood turned to ice as she realized they were surrounded. "Too late," came a cultured voice from the doorway. Lord Edmund Blackwood stepped into the room, followed by 3 men in dark tactical clothing. Their faces were cold and professional, the expressions of people who had killed before and felt no remorse about doing so again. "Lord Blackwood," Catherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What is the meaning of this intrusion? Lady Catherine, how unfortunate that you've chosen to involve yourself in matters that don't concern you." Blackwood's voice held no emotion whatsoever, as if he were discussing the weather rather than threatening a member of the nobility. You should have stayed in your own quarters and minded your own business. Princess Alara struggled to focus on the conversation, the poison in her system making it difficult to process what was happening. Lord Blackwood, I don't understand. Why are there armed men in my bedroom? Because, Your Highness, you've become a liability to national security, just like your mother before you. The words hit Alara like physical blows. Through the fog of her poisoned mind, she began to understand the horrifying truth. My mother, you killed my mother. Princess Isabella was going to destroy everything this country stands for. Blackwood replied matter-of-factly. She discovered certain classified operations that were essential to maintaining Britain's position in global affairs. When she threatened to expose them, she left us no choice. Catherine moved protectively in front of Alara, though she knew it was a futile gesture against armed men. You're insane if you think you can murder a member of the royal family and cover it up. My dear Lady Catherine, we've been covering up royal murders for 25 years. The public believes Princess Isabella died of a rare heart condition, and they'll believe Princess Alara died of the same hereditary illness. Tragic, but these things do run in families. One of the armed men stepped forward, speaking quietly to Blackwood. Sir, we have a problem. The doctor and the housekeeper weren't at the rendezvous point. They may have escaped. Blackwood's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing the cold fury beneath. Find them. Search every inch of the palace grounds. They cannot be allowed to reach the authorities with what they know. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in central London, Dr. Harrison and Margaret Whitmore were racing through the empty streets in the doctor's sedan, heading for Barclays Bank where the evidence of the conspiracy lay hidden. Margaret clutched the safe deposit box key with trembling hands, knowing that the documents inside represented both salvation and death sentences for everyone involved. They'll have discovered we're gone by now, Margaret said, her voice tight with fear. Blackwood's people will be searching everywhere. How many people are involved in this conspiracy? Dr. Harrison asked as he navigated through the deserted financial district. More than you can imagine, Margaret replied grimly. Cabinet ministers, military commanders, intelligence officers, even members of the royal household. The Crown Guardians.